Active and passive voices in French with FrenchSpanishOnline.com. Let's start with the difference between these two voices, the active and the passive voice in French and also in English. When you say je mange la tarte, I eat the pie or I'm eating the pie, we say that it is the active voice. Why? Because actually the active voice is when the subject of the sentence makes the action. So here the action is manger. And who actually is making this action? It is the subject, je, moi. So for this reason here we have the active voice. And now you understand what we are going to call the passive voice when the subject does not make the action. So here we have la tarte est mangée par moi, the passive voice. And we can say that here we have our subject, la tarte, but la tarte does not make anything here because again this is moi who is eating the pie. That's a difference between the two voices. So let's see now a bit more about the passive voice, la voix passive in French. La tarte est mangée par moi. So to have the passive voice, we need first the verb to be, the past participle of a verb, and the preposition par, usually is par. As you can see here, because we have as an auxiliary the verb être, there is an agreement between the subject, which is here feminine, and the past participle. That's why we need a final E at the end of the past participle. But first remember the verb to be and the preposition par. We also need a transitive verb like manger, to eat. So what is a transitive verb? A transitive verb is followed with an object that answers to the question what. If you say I eat the pie, the question what is what do you eat? And what do you eat? The answer is the pie. This is the object. So we can say that the verb to eat or manger in French is transitive. Some verbs in French that are transitive does not want the passive form. Coûter, to cost for example, valoir, pouvoir, it's not possible to build a passive voice with this verb. So if you have them in an exercise, for example, you will know now that it is not possible to have the passive voice from this verb. Cet article a été écrit par lui. So, you remember that we said that we need the preposition par, but not all the time, but fortunately we don't have a lot of verbs using the preposition de instead. But usually both are possible. We have verbs like that, border de, couvert de, décorer de, suivi de, aimer de, etc. But for example here, aimer de, you can also say aimer par. There is no problem. But just for you to know that you may find the preposition de for some verbs. In many cases in French, and that's the difference between French and English, we prefer to use the active voice. In French, when we have the passive voice, we sometimes say that the sentence is inelegant, heavy, and we prefer in this case to use the active voice. So here an example, cet article a été écrit par lui. So in French we say that it's a bit inelegant. We are going to see why after, but instead of saying cet article a été écrit par lui, this article was written by him, in French we are going to say c'est lui qui a écrit cet article. So here we have the active voice and we use the expression c'est with the pronoun c'est lui. To translate in French, this article was written by him. Another example, ils ont été frappés, they were hit. Well, instead of ils ont été frappés, we can say on les a frappés. So here we use the neutral pronoun on when you don't have by, because they were hit, but we don't know who did that actually. We don't have by, for example, robbers or things like that. We don't know. So when we don't know, we can use the neutral pronoun. And we have in this case the active voice. On les a frappés. L'alcool n'est pas vendu ici. Well, again, it's a bit heavy to speak like that, so we can say on ne vend pas d'alcool ici. Again, with the natural pronoun on, because we don't know by. The passive voice now, and tenses, different tenses, because we saw example with the present. Again, one more. If you have the active voice, Pierre lit le livre, so Pierre is reading or reads the book, the passive voice will be le livre est lu par Pierre. The book is read by Pierre. Okay. If you have now je lis le livre est lu par moi, so you remember this example. We had the personal pronoun before. We don't like when we have par followed with a personal pronoun like moi, toi, lui, elle, etc. So in this case, we prefer the active voice and we say c'est moi qui lis le livre, rather than le livre est lu par moi. L'imparfait, Pierre lisait le livre, and the passive will be le livre était lu par Pierre. If we take the same example with je lisais le livre, the passive voice will be, well, it's not really the passive voice, but instead of the passive voice, we will say c'est moi qui lisais le livre. Okay? So of course this form, le livre est lu par moi, well, I'm sure that you're going to find a teacher that wants you to write this kind of sentences to learn the passive voice in French, but actually it's not a thing that you will hear in France. After the imparfait, le passé composé, and we say Pierre a lu le livre, and the passive voice is le livre a été lu par Pierre. And again, if it's a personal pronoun, we will say c'est moi qui ai lu le livre, or c'est lui qui a lu le livre. Le futur, Pierre lira le livre sera lu par Pierre for the passive voice, and with the personal pronoun, c'est moi qui lirai le livre. Okay? So we know now how to conjugate and to use the passive voice, different tenses. Let's see now a big difference actually between French and English to show that we do not use much this voice in French. I want to say that less than the English. People must be warned can be translated, because there's a passive voice in English, can be translated by les gens doivent être avertis, but you certainly hear something like on doit avertir tout le monde. Again, with the natural pronoun on, because we don't have people must be warned by and something. We don't have this part, so we can use the natural pronoun. This book was written 2 centuries ago. So here we don't know who actually wrote this book. So for this reason, you can also say word for word, le livre a été écrit il y a 2 siècles, or on a écrit ce livre il y a 2 siècles. And here we have the active voice. Dogs are not allowed. So here it's not spoken language, it's written. So when it's written, actually in French it's a bit different. You can read sometimes les chiens ne sont pas admis, but you can also say, and when you speak, on n'accepte pas les chiens. So both are possible, but there is a subtle difference between the written French and the spoken French. 2 more examples. Smoking is forbidden, so again, written English. So fumer est interdit, so it's possible to read a sentence like that, but better we have interdiction de fumer. Have been told, so this kind of sentence is really interesting because actually it doesn't exist in French. You can't translate word for word have been told because it means nothing. So, j'ai été dit, no, it's not French at all. Again, here, I have been told, we don't know who actually, there, because you don't have been told by. So, in French, we are going to use, and this is the only possibility to translate this kind of sentence, this passive sentence in English. We say, on m'a dit que, etc., etc. So, all the sentence like similar to have been told, have been said, etc., etc. In French, it is with the natural pronoun on, and we have the active voice. Okay? So I hope this lesson will help you a bit to understand the passive voice in French and the difference with the English one. C'est fini. Thank you very much for watching the slides with me. See you next time on FrenchSpanishOnline.com. If you want to drop me a line, if you have some questions, no problem for me to give you a reply. Au revoir!